I'll start off with the first question. That is, how is a vow different from a contract?
It is not different. I mean, basically, it is in essence it is the same, because you have made a commitment. In the vow, the commitment is made with God, and in the contract, the commitment is made with the person. So basically, the essence is the same. The only thing is the nature which is different. When you make a vow, you talk to God, you speak to Him, you say that, well, if such and such a thing is accomplished, then I, as a result, would in return do such and such a charitable act. Although this is something which the Sahaba never, I mean, they were not encouraged to do. The Prophet himself hardly did this. But because making vows is something that was present in the Arabian society, so therefore the Prophet has made this clear that if you break a vow, then it is the same as breaking your contract. But the only thing is that you make a vow with God, and the contract is made with the human being or between human beings.
The reason why I was confused was because, for example, marriage is a contract, but you don't have to do any of those making up actions if you're getting a divorce. So that was my only reason.
Yeah, actually, you see, the marriage is a contract. I mean, marriage is the contract in the sense that you make a commitment for that. But that for that particular contract, you have been told how. If you have to break that contract, if you have to come out the contract, then this is how you have to come out of the contract. And the divorce, the method of divorce is that methodology. I mean, the way you have to conduct that divorce is the methodology. So although it's a contract, but it's a social contract in which both the parties are given the leverage or given the choice to come out of that contract. So you see, when you make contracts, some contracts are ones in which there is no chance of breaking those contracts, and if you break them, you must atone for them. But there are certain other contracts in which the stipulation or this exception is always present, that either of the two parties or one of the two parties can break that contract, but if it does so, then this is the procedure that has been adopted. So in the case of divorce, this has been already been laid out, that if you would like, you have the option of coming out of this contract, and if you would like to do this, then this is how a husband should go about doing it, and this is how a wife should go about doing it.
Thank you. Okay, my question is regarding the fact that you said that Ghamidi Sahabi encourages that we should take guidance from the Quran and its narrative. But usually, when I'm reading some different books, so what scholars are doing, they take the verse from between the Quran and they put it in any topic without its background, although it has no connection to that specific background. So in their verse, they're taking the guidance from the Quran. So what is the ruling in such matters? Because it doesn't sound quite fair.
The ruling is something that we've just discussed earlier on, that I mean, you just cannot interpret a book, I mean, let alone the Quran, out of its context. So if you are going to make the Quran as a basis of your deduction, then you must realize that this deduction must be based on the fact that the verse that you are interpreting always occurs in a particular context, and a background and an occasion. And if you disregard that context and occasion, what would happen is that you would be misunderstanding, or there would be a very strong chance of misunderstanding that verse of the Quran. So because our scholars generally do not follow this contextual approach, they don't see the context. And the reason for not seeing the context is that in their view, the Quran has to be interpreted separately, and every verse should be interpreted through a hadith. So typically what they would, or a asar of a sahabi. So what they would do is that whenever they would take one verse or maybe a group of verses, they will say that, well, we have a hadith which tells us that this group of verses or this particular verse means so and so or such and such. So this is an interpretive approach which they have adopted, and I have discussed this approach elsewhere in detail in a series that I've just finished maybe some months ago, and shown that how this approach has been detrimental to the understanding of the Quran, because the Quran is in a context. If you start interpreting separately, I mean, each verse independently without giving due regard to the context, more often than not, you will end up not properly interpreting the verse.
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Doing charitable works to the needy people comes a lot in the Quran. Of course, there is a context in today's lecture of atonement. My question is, how do we define a needy person? Like, are they the ones who are eligible for zakat?
I mean, this is something which is always subjective to a person's own discretion. When I say that such a person is in need, you don't need to have a standard for that definition, because needs could vary, people can vary, societies can vary. But as far as your own understanding is concerned, you should know that, well, what are you doing? What you're doing is that you're not helping a person who's already has all those needs fulfilled. You're helping a person who's in need of some of those basic necessities of life. So basically, when you say that a person is in need, we generally speak of the fact that the basic necessities of life is something that he is not able to arrange for himself or herself. This is a bottom line, I would say, that you need to follow. But other than that, there could be situations in which maybe, for example, even some basic needs are being met, but a person is still in a spot of bother. So that would account for those specific circumstances in which you can make a decision and take a decision yourself. But to have a reference point, you can say that these are the basic needs of a person. For example, food, clothing, shelter, health, education. Generally, these are the 5 needs which every person needs, and this is the bare minimum which every person, if he's lacking in them, then he can be called a needy person. But there could be situations when he has all these 5 things, and there could be some other need or some other pressing need. It could be emotional, it could be psychological, it could be over and above his resources. Even that could be classified. So I've just given you a general idea, starting off with this basic definition, but it can be expanded. And again, as I said, the bottom line here is your own subjective decision, that you see that a person is in need, and you take that decision. So it's not that it's always the fact that you see that, well, since a person is eligible for zakat, so therefore he can be regarded as a needy person. At times, even after his needs are, so to speak, those needs are met, you still see that there could be a chance of helping that person. So in that case, it would become subjective. And again, once if your conscience if you're satisfied with your conscience, then you can go along with that too.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have a long chat question that gives us different situations and asks if the rulings apply to these situations. So I'll list them one by one. The first one is if it's a promise that's broken by consent of both parties.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, they don't have to do that. If you annul the contract, you see, you need to understand that this when you annul a contract, the contract itself is something which is written before. I mean, it's a prearranged sort of a thing. So when you annul a contract, it is always written in that contract that this contract can be annulled by the consent of both parties. If that is so, then this condition itself tells us that no atonement needs to be made. I mean, it's not the classical in the classical sense that you are breaking the law. You are just coming out of that contract, and the arrangement through which you are coming out of that contract is mutually agreed. So no, you don't need to atone for that.
Okay. Then the next situation is if a person was forced by an external power to break the promise.
You see, this is a situational thing. I mean, if someone was forced to do it, and what exactly was the nature of that, of those compelling circumstances, how much he had in hand, how much he did not have in hand. But let's assume that he was totally powerless and totally helpless. I mean, it was done without any of his own undertaking. Then I think he would be exempted in this regard to fulfill, to undertake an atonement.
And then the same would apply if there's like some external situation or circumstance that's preventing them from fulfilling the promise, even if they want to, right?
As I said, these are hypothetical. These are hypotheses which people, or suppositions. So, it's always good to have examples, because, as I said, it's not easy to comment on hypotheses, because they are more abstract in nature. So, if this is the situation that the person has asked, then it's always good to have some more details. I mean, some real life happenings, so that we can apply our minds to. Abstract questions, what they do is that they give you a yes or no answer, or they're meant for that. And it's not always the right thing to say so. So I think it's better that situational things, when they occur, they should be, the situation itself must be conveyed, so that if you ask an opinion from someone, he can give you that opinion while taking into consideration those real life happenings. So I would also suggest that supposed or suppositions on the basis of which you ask rulings, which is at times something that we do very often. I would rather not comment. I would say that we should, abstain from them and take examples from real life situations.
And then the last situation, or the last question is business agreement also part of a promise, or does it have to be only sweared by in the name of God to become a legal promise in the light of Quran?
I see a contract which is made between two people, whether it's a business contract, whether it's a social, the nature in which you are entering into a certain undertaking, which involves two parties, the way we have just seen. It does not entail that, because you see, such contracts, whether they are business or non-business, they always have that provision that how you can come out of that contract. So if the two parties in any way are able to come out of that contract according to the conditions that they have laid down, which are generally done in the case of contracts, then it will not count as a breach of oath in any way.
Then the next chat question asks, when the verse says 10 people, can the selection of these 10 individuals be based on a person's judgment, or can we disregard their religious associations?
Of course, we have to disregard the religious association. I mean, it's not that only Muslims need to be fed or clothed. Any people, or any sort of individuals who are in need or who need to be fed, they can be. They can be the ones whom you can do so. But as I said, this assessment, of course, could be subjective. You would find out for yourself, and as a result, you take that decision. But the second part would say that, well, do they have to be Muslims? As I understand from your question, no, they don't have to be. It's not dependent on faith. Whenever you do a charitable act, whether it is zakat or whether it is the atonement of sins, unless it is specifically mentioned, this is something of a general directive, and you can feed or clothe people of any religion.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We'll start our second round of questions now. So if you have any non-topic related questions, please feel free to ask them. Adil Quraishi, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Sir.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, can zakat be given to one's brother or sister?
If the brother and sister is in need, yes, why not?
Need
if he is in
is,
a spot of bother.
so need, I
You
mean,
see-
one could always give money, right? If they're not poor, but they do have needs, they could always use money to spend on child's education or buy clothes or something. I mean, they're not essentially or necessarily poor, but yeah.
Yes, as I said, I mean, as far as you're spending on those basic necessities, that's the bottom line that you can always go by. So any health need, any educational need, any need for food, shelter, and your living expenses, they all come under those basic needs. And so even if it's an educational need, it could be a higher education that your brother's children maybe, or maybe he himself would need. Even that would be accounted as a need, accounted for as a need.
Right, so thank you. And it's a very basic, quick question, a practical question. If I've started praying, I was praying first Salah, and then the person next to me and his colleague started praying the same first Salah as Jama'ah. So he started becoming an Imam, and the other guy became his Muqtadi while I'm in the middle of the prayer. Should I break my first prayer and try to join that Jamaat, or should I continue?
Well, that's the option that you have. I mean, if you think that there is a Jamaat going on and you might join it, well, you can break your own prayer and join it. And there could be instances and circumstances maybe in which you are in a hurry or you need to finish your prayer first, and you can always complete your prayer. So it's not a hard and fast rule that you have to definitely join a Jamaat. Yes, it is highly recommended, and if you are able to do so, this is the right path. But as I said, there could be exceptions.
Thank you, sir.
Our next question is from Abdullah Zishan. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Saab, on just to follow up on the previous things you've mentioned, key needs can be psychological and emotional, right? So is there room for helping people in those spaces instead of by food or clothes?
Like, for example, can you cite an example?
Like, for example, like emotional psychological needs में normally counseling की ज़रूरत होती है. So if like,
of course, I mean, it's like a doctor. I mean, if you are helping a person for counseling, for example, you're paying the fees of a doctor. So that comes under health, and health is something which is psychological, it is physical, it relates to all parts of the body. So mental health is equally, it's equally one's right to have that, in all cases being provided for.
Okay, so वो जो money का जो part है उसमें वो शामिल हो जाएगा क्या? Like
Mental health. You see, if you're talking about health, psychological health, so just as you would maybe help a person if he is undergoing an operation or a surgery, and he or she would not have the means to do so, you can go out and help him. In a very similar way, if someone is in need of mental health, for the rehabilitation of his mental health, to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or any similar person, if you provide for that fee of the doctor or any other expense that related to his disease, it would also count in the same sense.
okay, I have one last question on this on today's topic, which is an oath or a vow a personal thing, or can we do it in a public setup? If it does have a public theme, will there be like some sort of extra atonements in case we break them?
It doesn't matter whether you do it in private or in public. You have made a commitment. So that commitment is something that has to be fulfilled. So whether you have done so in the presence of people, whether you have done so alone, the sense is the same. The essence is the same, that you have given your word. And if you have given your word, then as I said, that only in instances, as the Quran has said, that if a better option comes along, and if you break that, you have to break that oath, then you atone for that oath and you adopt that better option. But breaking that oath, breaking an oath in all circumstances, whether it's a promise, it's a word given, has to be undertaken. The atonement has to be undertaken.
No, but I need not do something extra, right? Because like hukukul ibad ka kuch, like does that count?
You need not do something extra. What exactly do
in
you
the
mean
sense
by
because
that?
public setup, if I've taken an oath in a public setup, and should I like sort of apologize to them as well, apart from the charity, for example, if I do?
So see, these are obvious things that when you are breaking an oath, and that breach of oath is something. If it also accompanies, a situation in which you need to make an apology, and that is something which your conscience will tell you, then yes, you should do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Akram Bhatti, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum salam.
सर सूरह जिन की आयत नंबर 3 है, जिसमें वो है वअन्नहु तआला जद्दु रब्बिना मत्तखज़ साहिबतम वला वलदा, और इस तरह की सूरह अनाम की 101 है, बदियु समावाति वल अर्द अन्ना यकूनु लहु वलदुन वलम तकुल लहु साहिबा व खलक़ कुल्ल शैइन व हुवा बिकुल्लि शैइन अलीम। ये और जो लूक में है, बाइबल की लूक में कि उनकी शादी हुई थी मरियम अलैहिस्सलाम की, और तो ये किस्सा से आपस में इनका रिलेशन है कि हमारी एक
These are two entirely different. These are two different things. You're citing the Quran. The Quran is speaking about the fact that God doesn't have any wife. This is what the Quran says. But the Bible is not talking about God. It is talking about Jesus. So you see,
के हवाले से बहस करते हैं लोग कि जी उनकी कोई लूक में लिखा हुआ है और किसी और भी कि उनकी शादी हुई थी यूसुफ बंदे के नाम से.
Yes. So that is, what I said, what I'm trying to explain is that these are two different things. You see, when the Quran says that God has no wife, and it has said this on some occasions, this is a different thing. And when the Bible says that Mary or Maryam, she had a husband called by the name of Joseph, that's an entirely different thing. These are two separate things. They cannot be, taken to be one. One is regarding God, and the other is regarding the paternal, the nature of how Jesus was brought into this world.
जो बहस ये है कि अल्लाह ताला जब खुद कह रहे हैं ये दो आयतों में, तो ये कहना चाह रहे हैं कि भी बच्चे के पैदा होने के लिए बीवी का होना जरूरी है, और फिर फरमाते हैं कि भी he was born, कुरान पाक में फरमाते हैं कि he was born without a father. तो ये है बहस के भी.
So, also I see. So you're talking about the miraculous birth of Jesus. I mean, so you see, I mean, this is something that we have to understand, that I mean, God has His laws through which He conducts certain affairs. For example, in normal circumstances, it is only through the union of a man and a woman that a child is born. But in certain exceptional cases, in certain areas, we see how the Almighty gives those signs and miracles to His prophets for various purposes. So the birth of Jesus was a miraculous act of God. It's a miracle of God. It should not be considered analogous to a general form. I mean, the general practice in this way. So Jesus was able to heal the sick. He was able to bring back the dead from the people who had died to life once again. We know that Moses was given a number of signs. So prophets of God are given these signs and these miracles for the reasons we might discuss. For example, they have to convey the truth to someone. They have to caution and prod people, and this can only be done once people are made to witness things which are out of the ordinary. So this is an entirely different genre. I mean, miracles cannot be held analogous to what generally happens. This is an exception.
सर वो मेरी एक बहस इसी हो रही थी एक्चुअली अहमदी के साथ। वो कह रहे थे कि देखो भाई, कुरान पाक में अल्लाह ताला कहता है मिरेकल्स, और ये जो अपना अल्लाह ताला ने फरमाया खातमुन नबिय्यीन, खातमुर मुरसलीन, तो फिर उसके बाद अल्लाह ने डिसाइड कर लिया नहीं, मैं तो एक और लाऊंगा नबी।
I mean, you see, if you're talking with Ahmadi community, that has another, I would say, methodology. And whenever you talk to people of this community, it is always right to start off with the primary debate, and that debate relates to the verse in the Quran, which is the verse of Khatam al-Nabuwat, or the Khatam al-Nabiyyin verse. So I think the way that you might find more beneficial when you speak to people in this regard is not to indulge in peripheral debates, but to engage in the primary debate. And that debate actually relates to this verse of Surah Ahzab. And you should not, indulge in any other debate. Just concentrate on what the words of the Quran say in this regard. And that is how I think is the best method to discuss this issue with people who belong to that community. If you start engaging in other areas, it will be a discussion that have no end. So this is an approach issue. You see, when you discuss contentious issues, when you discuss issues which are irresolvable or they form a bone of contention, then you go to the basic issue first and address that issue. So in this case, the basic issue relates to the issue of Khatam al-Nabiyyin, and I think that is the area that you need to converse with regarding such people.
Yeah, they throw again these verses against, and then
I know. Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a chat question that asks, treating people nicely, helping them in a way that's not associated with money, or helping people psychologically and so on, are these only social ethics, or should one do these because they're highly regarded as good deeds?
You see, these are the motives. That a person might have. When a person does something because they are good deeds, it is because the fact that they are good is ingrained in one's human nature. This is something which comes out of a person so naturally. So when a person does these things, he's not thinking that he's doing these things because they are socially beneficial in any way. It is something that it naturally comes out of our own selves, and we feel that yes, this is what we should do. So it's not that you are thinking all these things when you're doing good deeds. It is something that naturally flows out of you because of the concern for the other person. So doing a charitable act, of course, is something according to the Quran is something which is going to please the Almighty, and it is something which naturally comes out of ourselves. So it is only later that we come to relate to it, why we did it, or why we withheld ourselves in doing it. But the incentive, I would say, or in fact, if I use the word, the motivating factor or the underlying factor is that inherent good is something which our own conscience bids us to do, and that is why we do it.
So if in case you don't end up doing these, for example, you're not saying the best words that you could say to a person, or you're not helping an old man cross the roads, would you get penalized?
So it's, as I said, it's situational. I mean, this is a collective responsibility, and at times, if you are the only person present, and if you, it is, I mean, all sense and reason demand that this is something that you should have done, and you don't do it, then yes, you would be penalized. But of course, when you are crossing a road, or some person who's crossing the road, and there are several people, and you are in a commitment that you need to fulfill, then this would give you this could give you a legitimate excuse from that. But if it is a life-saving situation, then again that would add a different color to it, and then you would I mean set everything aside and do so. So I think these are all hypothetical conditions or situations. In real time situations, you will only get penalized if you had all the you had all the opportunity as well as the right time to do so, and you still desisted from doing that. That would perhaps account for being penalized. Other than that, because it's a collective responsibility, or such things are collective responsibilities, so as long as the society is taking care of them, it's not a single individual. I mean, you just cannot hold one single individual responsible for such things. It's like a collectivity that should behave in this way.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Noshad Shafkat, you're up ahead. Please go.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor. Doctor, I was just wondering if you could throw some light on the fact that how did it come about that the Hadith is given more importance than the Quran, in the sense that the Quran will be interpreted only in the light of the Hadith, although one is a divine scripture and the other is reports by common men, as it is. How did it come about? Because this is really a bit of a confusing thing.
I think it's confusing for us 14 centuries later, because we are standing far apart from the personality of the Prophet. Consider yourself, let's say, about 100 years or 200 years apart from the Prophet. The weight of his personality and the sheer fact that you know that, well, a certain Quranic verse was interpreted by the Prophet in this way is reason enough to grip a person, and he would say, well, I'm not going to use my own sense, and if I found that the Prophet has said something, I'll just follow it. So you see, this is the impact that the personality of the Prophet had on people, that they just started to think that, well, if they have something from him, then why don't we just go and implement that? So they perhaps did not realize that had we really had something as indubitable as we can think about regarding the Quranic interpretation, definitely we would have adopted that. But the fact is that this interpretation of the Prophet has reached us in a dubious way. We just cannot know that whether the Prophet really said that. And apart from that, I think in one of the courses I taught, I also explained that a very, very large part of these Quranic verse has not been explained by the Prophet at all. In fact, not even the Sahaba have explained that. It is mostly the Tabaeen, or the third generation after the Prophet, which has done so. And people think that because the Tabaeen would have learned it from the Sahaba, and the Sahaba would have learned it from the Prophet, that they almost give the same status to the Tabaeen as if the Prophet would have understood to convey that to them. So basically, it's the impact of Prophet's personality, and also not realizing that although this impact is huge, but the way that this impact has transmitted or transferred itself into history is that it cannot accord certitude to his interpretation. This aspect was somehow ignored, and because of this genre of the tafsir. So you see that today's madrasas are just following the things that have already been done 1,000 years ago. So they're doing nothing new. So you see, these rules were formulated a millennium ago almost, and our education system is geared towards that. So it's something that is following in the footsteps that were demarcated centuries ago.
Thank you very much. Fabian Yazi, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम प्रोफेसर साहब, हमारे उस्ताद गांधी साहब ने एक अपनी लेक्चर में बताया था कि इबादत सिर्फ अल्लाह की करनी है और अकीदत सिर्फ रसूलुल्लाह से रखनी है। इसके बाद जितने भी उम्मत में उलमा और फुकहा हैं, उनकी हम इज़्ज़त और उनसे हम इज़्ज़त का रिश्ता रखेंगे और उनकी कोशिशों से इस्तिफादा किया जाएगा। लेकिन कुछ लोग जो हैं वो अपने असातिज़ा से भी अकीदत रखते हैं। ये जितने भी रिलीजियस इंस्टीट्यूट्स में जो लोग स्टडी करते हैं वो ये कहते हैं कि असातिज़ा कराम से भी ये रखा जा सकता है रिश्ता अकीदत का। तो आप इस पे उनको जब ये बात बताई जाए तो वो फिर दलील तलब करते हैं कि अकीदत रसूलुल्लाह की ज़ात तक क्यों महदूद कर दी गई है।
You see, I mean, this is a human attitude that is, that has to be evaluated. At times, it all depends what you mean by the word Aqidah. I mean, if the word Aqidah means that you respect a person, if you accord full honor to your teacher, this is fine. The only thing is that you just cannot take for granted whatever your teacher says, even if you think that your mind tells you that this is something which is going against the Quran or your own conscience. So it is, if you have respect for your teacher, but whatever he says or she says is something that is not correct to the best of your understanding, so you just cannot present this plea that because I have aqeedat for my teacher, therefore I'm just going to accept whatever he or she says. Aqeedat, I think, is something that you should have as far as respect. The proper way would be that you respect all your teachers, but you have all the authority to differ with your teachers. But from the Prophet, you just don't have the authority. I'm talking about the practice of the Prophet. So as far as the person of the Prophet is concerned, he is a person from whom we cannot differ with. If we know that something has come from him in a certain way and we understand it to be so, we don't have a right to differ with him. But in the case of an ordinary human being, we have all the right to differ with that because that is his interpretation or understanding. So if our teacher says something and our own understanding is contrary to what our teacher says and we very respectfully differ with him, it would not go against our own veneration for that teacher. It's just a thing that it should be acceptable. So aqeedat needs to be understood in its proper perspective.
जी उस्ताद, एक और सवाल भी है अगर आप इजाज़त दें तो। ये हिजरत के बाद जब अंसार और महाजरीन के दरमियान अखुवत का रिश्ता कायम किया था रसूलुल्लाह ने, तो अब्दुर्रहमान बिन औफ के हिस्से में जो अंसारी भाई आए थे, उन्होंने अपने माल का भी आधा हिस्सा उनको देने की पेशकश कर दी और फिर अपनी 2 बीवियों में से एक बीवी के बारे में भी कहा कि एक आप ले लें। मतलब ये पेशकश की उन्होंने, जिसको उन्होंने बहरहाल कबूल नहीं किया था अब्दुर्रहमान बिन औफ रज़ियल्लाहु अन्हु ने। तो आप इसकी वज़ाहत कर देंगे कि आया उन्होंने ये इक़दाम क्यों किया अपनी बीवियों के बारे में? इस पर एक नक़्द उठा है कि उनकी नज़र में शायद ख़वातीन की इज़्ज़त नहीं थी। आप इस पे रोशनी डाल दें, आया क्या चीज़ उनके पेश नज़र होगी?
Let us suppose that this incident, the way you have reported it, is entirely the case. It is true. First we need to examine whether this actually took place or not, because historical narratives, they need to be understood and they need to be evaluated. But let us suppose that historicity is not a problem and it is something which is taken for granted. It is true. You see, we need to understand that a lot of things, they are governed by our culture and our society. Something which is culturally acceptable in one society could be something which is not culturally acceptable in another society. In the Arab society of those times, this was something, this practice was culturally acceptable, and it was in fact considered to be a very noble thing, because what you're doing is you are trying to provide for a brother who has come to you, who's migrated. He may have left his wife behind, or his wife might have been an idolatress, and he was required to leave her behind, and now he has no one, so to speak. So this something, of course, if he has offered, is purely of a practice that was existent in Arabia. This is one thing. And the second thing is that if the wife had, for example, refused that, well, she's not willing, this would have never taken place. And this could have only taken place if Abdurrahman bin Auf would have consulted with his wife, and the wife would have said that, yes, I'm willing to make this sacrifice and I'm willing to go to that person. So you see, marriage cannot take place without any consent. So first, you need to understand this was culturally acceptable in those times, and second, the wife must not have been, she would never have been forced against her will. This could have only happened if the wife was willing to do so, and as you said, that it actually never happened. But I do think that if it could have happened, then it would have happened only with the consent of the wife. And in the first instance, if she would have said that she is not prepared to do so, this would not have even gone forward.
जी ठीक है, शुक्रिया।
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We only have 4 minutes remaining, so Akram Bhatti, if you can really quickly send in your question, then go ahead. Otherwise, we'll end the session today, and inshallah, you can ask your question next week.
I have only one word. I want a clarification if sir can. Sir, ये सूरह मरियम की 22 आया में है हमलत हो फन तबज़त बिही मकानन कसिया. तो ये फन तबज़त का तर्जुमा कहीं लोगों ने किया है she went into seclusion, दूसरा क्या है she withdrew. मैंने I looked up the dictionary, वो it says इसका मतलब throw करना भी होता है.
Have you seen Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi's translation, or you seen Ustaz Amin Asad Islai's translation? Because this is a very common word.
नहीं मैंने वो नहीं देखा.
Please look it up.
Okay, ठीक है. शुक्रिया.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Inshallah, see you tomorrow in the technicality of the Quran session.